Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Clifton this morning. We're going to be talking the matrix of murder. It seems very early in the morning to be discussing death on a Sunday. So thank you for turning out. With me, I have two authors who need almost no introduction. Ian Rankin, Anthony Horowitz. I'm Hallie Rubenhold, and this event is going to run not exactly as every sort of event runs, in that I'm not really the moderator. I'm sort of the introducer and the wrapper-upper. And I'll be taking questions after 45 minutes, so please consider what questions you'd like to ask us. But I will be participating in the conversation too. So, because this is a kind of three-handed conversation where it should feel like you're just eavesdropping at a pub on the conversation between two authors of fiction, crime fiction, and one author of true crime non-fiction, sorry. It's early in the morning for me too, I'm afraid. I have asked both of them to write introductions for themselves. So I will read what Sir Ian Rankin sent me. Ian Rankin has been writing about his character John Rebus for almost 40 years. Like his fictional detective, he lives in Edinburgh and seeks inspiration in the Oxford bar. And Anthony Horowitz has been writing murder stories for books, film, and TV for most of his life. When he's not writing, he's probably asleep. Let's hope he's not asleep today. He lives in Richmond-on-Thames with his wife and his dog. And everyone, please watch 9 Bodies in a Mexican Morgue, which Anthony wrote and is currently on BBC One.
I didn't write that bit. You said that.
Well, no, but we've negotiated this, which is sort of emblematic of how this whole session is going to go. So I am Hallie Rubenhold, and I am a social historian, and I also write best-selling true crime. My first book, The Five, you may have heard of it, won the Baillie Gifford Prize for non-fiction. My second book, if you're staying here, is in your goodie bag. It's called Story of a Murder, and it's a retelling of the Dr. Crippen murder in 1910. So, without further ado, I am going to get us started, which is, Ian, was crime always something that interested you?
Thanks, Hallie. That's a question that we could all have a go at answering. And the answer for me is no. I was always a reader, and in fact, I didn't think I read any crime fiction because I hadn't gone through. My sister went through an Agatha Christie phase, and I picked one up and thought, this makes no sense. This is not a world I understand as a kind of Scottish working class guy growing up in a mining village. The mysterious poisons in the billiard room were not for me. If Miss Marple arrives at your door, tell her to F off, because otherwise you'll be dead by chapter 3. So I just thought, but I remembered that I did read the Shaft novels. Remember Shaft? No, you're too young.
No.
The first single I ever bought was the theme from Shaft by Isaac Hayes. I was not old enough to be allowed into the cinema to see this. This was an X certificate movie. But nobody stopped me buying the book by Ernest Tiedemann, the novel that it was based on, or the novelization of the film. And so I did read some crime fiction when I was young, but at university I thought I was going to be a professor of English. I was going to write literary fiction. I had attempted literary fiction, hadn't done very well. And then I thought, I'm going to update Jekyll and Hyde, my favorite novel, one of my favorite novels, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm going to bring it back to Edinburgh, which is where I thought the book should have been set in the first place. And I'm going to update it, make it modern, make it present day. And then I remember the first line I wrote of my notes was the main character may be a detective, not a doctor. And that was it. And I was off and running with John Rebus, and then he just refused to leave the building.
Which is a good thing, as it turns out. Yeah.
But I know Anthony grew up reading crime fiction, didn't you, at school?
I grew up with crime. My father was a criminal, so that was a helpful start. His business partner was a man called Eric Miller, who was very much involved in sort of the senior side of the Labour government at the time, and who killed himself. The only man I've ever heard of who managed to shoot himself in the head twice. So there were very mysterious aspects to his death too. I was sent as a young boy to a really rather horrible school in North London, the sort of place that beat you till you bled and then charged your parents for the elastoplast. I grew up there miserable, and I was only saved by the fact that I discovered the library and began to read, and reading was my great love. Also, at the age of 9 and 10, I knew without any question at all I would be a writer. And then it was being given the Sherlock Holmes books when I was about 17 that persuaded me that I'd be a crime writer, because I absolutely adored Sherlock Holmes, largely because so many of the books are set in such boring places. He's only a great writer who has set stories in West Norwood and Croydon and other suburbs of London. And I love the way that murder mystery, could start in a temple in Agra and a murder out there, and that the tentacles of crime could come into any community, anywhere, and liven up your life. So that's what fired my imagination. And so by the age of 18 or 19, I was already writing books. And also my school did help inspire me, because all the teachers who taught me at that school where I was, I murdered in my books, one after another. And I've been doing more or less the same ever since.
But Hallie, what about you? I mean, you're a serious historian. Did you stumble on writing about crime? I mean, had you read crime?
Well, I kind of came through the back door into it, because I think as a historian, what I'm interested in is social history. And what kind of throws up the most amazing amounts of information when you're writing social history are witness statements and trial transcripts. And it is absolutely astonishing what you can find out about people's lives, and what they got up to, and what they thought, and what they wore, and what they ate, and what the world was like all around them. And what is so fascinating is that there's also a story at the heart of this. And so as I'm studying this world and looking at this world, I'm often seeing, well, there are these incredible human interest stories, which are crimes, which are occurring, which, I've often thought that a crime is like a snapshot of a particular era, at a particular moment. I mean, the same is true today. If a crime happened for example, if there was a murder that happened in January 2025, and we would look back at all the witness statements and the police statements, and you'll get an idea of what was going on, what the weather was like, what was in the news even, what people were thinking about, what they were talking about. It does just capture this. And that's why crime is kind of like a gold mine for historians, because you can really get another angle in on a time period.
But I mean, the thing that attracted me to crime fiction quite early on, when my first crime novel was published, it was reviewed as a crime novel and went into the crime sections in the bookshops, and I was appalled. And I would go into the bookshop in Edinburgh and take it out the crime section and put it in the Scottish literature section, next to Muriel Spark and Robert Louis Stevenson. Next day I'd go back, it was back in the crime section, next to Ruth Rendell. So I began reading Ruth Rendell. What attracted me was that thing about social history. The crime novel at its best is telling us about ourselves and our society and the mess that we're in, and how did we get here, and why do we human beings keep doing these terrible things.
Yeah.
So if you want to know about any culture in the world, you go to the crime fiction. It doesn't matter which country or which culture it is. Go to the crime fiction, it will tell you all about the people, the politics, the history of the place. And if you're lucky, you'll also find out which parts of a city or a country to avoid, and where to get a good meal or a good drink.
I've often heard people say that crime writing, whether this is even reportage in newspapers, it holds up a mirror to a society of their fears. So the way in which crime is discussed, the way in which it's talked about in the media and in books, will kind of provide an insight into that society's psychology.
I loved hearing you saying you moved your books. I used to send my children into any bookshop we passed to take the books out of wherever they were and put them on the front table. They used to get, Daddy, please don't, not again, they'd say if they saw a bookshop. But I think what's interesting in this conversation is, of course, is the two different perspectives. You're writing about real crime, whereas you're writing about something which is close to real crime. I mean, the world of Rebus is extremely well realized, and it's procedural, it's people in uniforms, and you've got all the inside knowledge of it. And I'm writing what might be called the fantasy end of crime, which is, the classic Agatha Christie style whodunit with clues and red herrings and suspects, and then everybody in the library at the end to discover who did it. And I often wonder whether, in terms of writing real crime, you don't feel, first of all, constrained, because you are, after all, tiptoeing into other people's deaths. And also, do you ever worry about why people want to read real crime?
I do wonder about it all the time. And I mean, I think it's a very, very different thing. I mean, I wonder if people read crime fiction because they like puzzles to solve. And I wonder if they come to crime fiction looking for something very different than when they come to true crime, which is, I think they are looking to try to understand, you know, the sort of darkness in humanity. You know, where does that come from? And I, you know, I mean, there is now such an interest in true crime. You know, true crime podcasting is massive. Apparently doesn't translate that well into true crime books. My publishers told me.
Do you think there's a salacious quality in people, you know, things like Making of a Murder on TV, where the entire world was trying to second guess the arrest of this young man and whether he had actually committed the murder or not. And this is, and it turned what was a tragedy and somebody's death into almost a parlor game.
Well, that's it, and that is the real danger. Is that, I mean, there are a lot of ethical problems, I think, with true crime. And I mean, people are often very, very surprised to hear me say, I do not like true crime. I am not a fan of true crime. And in fact, you know, the reason why I'm writing what I write is because I'm coming at it as a historian, not as an enthusiast of true crime. That is not to insult anyone here who likes true crime. I feel there are many ethical problems and pitfalls with true crime, which need to be resolved. I think, you know, what we saw with, for example, Nicola Bulley, this woman who disappeared, and the story just exploded, and you had all of these kind of vloggers and true crime enthusiasts just amping this up and turning this into a circus.
Madeleine McCann.
And Madeleine McCann as well. And you know, people have to step back because true crime is not about them. You know, we still have to be enormously respectful of the families, of the communities, of all of the people who are involved. And I find with true crime, it really oversteps the mark in many cases.
Well, the thing about your book, The Five, is that it was like a necessary corrective because it wasn't focused on the monster.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much stuff about Jack the Ripper out there. But Jack the Ripper doesn't get mentioned in the book.
And very deliberately.
It's about the victims.
Yes.
And you build their lives up and you show them as real people, three-dimensional people. And I thought that was fascinating because so much of what what the public seems to be interested in is this mysterious serial killer, not in the victims.
Can you tell the first line of your new book, which we were talking about the other night?
Oh, gosh. No murderer should ever be the keeper of their victim's story.
I think it's such a great line.
Yeah, yeah. We're both going to steal that in our future frontispiece of the next book.
High praise indeed. Thank you.
But it's interesting because it's also that, I mean, as in true crime, where a lot of the focus has in the past been on the monsters, also in fiction. I mean, early on in my career, I fell under the spell of Thomas Harris. And I thought, okay, why is this guy making a shitload of money and I'm not? He's got this extraordinary, horrible Hannibal Lecter, who, I mean, I'm sure in The Silence of the Lambs we're supposed to be on the side of Clarice Starling, but he is such a larger-than-life personality. He's got so much charisma that you want more of him and less of her. And as Thomas Harris continued that series, he spent more time focusing on Lecter, and then made a crucial mistake, I think, of explaining why Lecter was Lecter in one of the books. And I thought that you know, we don't need to know that. So I started doing it in my books. I would have these. So the third Rebus novel was a serial killer novel set in London with a kind of Rococo killer, and then I thought, no, this is not what I want to be doing.
I think also Thomas Harris, to a certain extent, jumped the shark when the books became so violent and disgusting. And it was an interesting line to cross between being a character that you admired and liked. I think it was the second book ends with them having a dinner party where they're actually eating somebody's brains while he is sitting at the table. Sorry to spoil your Sunday morning with that little detail. But nonetheless, I just thought it was interesting that you can only go so far. I guess that's true also of what you're writing. You're talking about the victims.
Yes.
I don't know to what extent you go into pathological sort of examination in your books. And is there a line that you can cross?
None with The Five. Yeah. None with The Five. However, with Story of a Murder, I do. But I do it in a way that it's very strategically placed in the book, which is it is the moment that Belle Elmore, who is the victim, transitions from being a human being to being body parts. Because this is what happens in the media, is that She is no longer a person. She no longer has a personality. She is viscera. She is hair fragments and curlers. And that is how she is referred to and how she is discussed, kind of ad nauseum, you know, in the press, just over and over again. You know, the woman's spleen, the woman's stomach lining, the woman's this, that. You know, and in many cases during the trial, she doesn't even have a name. Crippen doesn't even call her his wife. He calls her that woman. So it's part of that process, the dehumanization. This
brings me to something that I'm interested in, which is how much research you feel you need to do, and whether too much research can get in the way of telling of the narrative, because the narrative needs to be compelling. And if you've got too much detail, sometimes it just takes the reader out of the story a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting balance you have to do. I mean, I love research. I think research is one of the most. It's an interesting thing about some of the talks I've been to here have been about artificial intelligence and the ChatGPT and their use in books. And I think we have come to a society where all of us are guilty of searching for immediate answers to anything you want to know. And when I'm doing my research now, only this morning, I'm writing a book set in 1945, and I wanted to know the price of a loaf of bread in 1945. I think it was 30 Reichspfennig, in case you were wondering. But the point is that
not in London, surely.
No, but 1945 Berlin. The point is that I felt guilty about using that because it's just a nugget of information. It is not what comes with research. When I was working with my wife, Jill Green, on Foyle's War, I read, to start with, two absolutely magnificent books about the Second World War. Norman Longmate and Angus Calder wrote wonderful social histories. But then their books led me to more books. And for every episode of that show, I found myself, the journey to find a piece of information took me down a path that was completely unexpected. You don't get that with Google or ChatGPT. And it becomes an adventure in itself. And every story that we wrote about was found on the way to another story.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, that really is true?
Yeah.
I must write about that.
That's people say, well, how do you get your ideas? And often it's you know, when you're in the archive or you're reading other people's books on things, and it's, you know, it'll be a footnote, it'll be something else that is just this incredible bit of information that you file away, because it just opens up a whole other world and a whole other set of stories as well. And it is detective work, as you say.
And I even have a thesaurus in my office and a dictionary, because if I'm searching for a word, I love the fact that you can find 50 other words or 15 other words or 5 other words surrounding a word which you didn't know and might use. And I love language. And so even searching for a word, which is a sort of research, to me is a pleasure. The journey, you know, the journey being better than the arrival in some ways.
Yeah. This latest book is unusual in the series because it is set almost entirely in prison. And I thought, how do you research that? Apart from the obvious. But I was lucky. I've got a friend in Edinburgh who's a photographer, a very good photographer, but he used to be a prison guard in Barlinnie in Glasgow. And I said to him, do you know anybody that I can talk to? And through somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, I got to the governor of Edinburgh Prison, HMP Edinburgh. And luckily for me, he was on the cusp of retiring. And he said, well, come in and have a walk around and you can chat to people and chat to me. And he was very open. I think if the governor was not on the cusp of retiring, he might not have been so open with me. And so I got a lot of great stuff. I got a lot of detail. But then you go, well, yes, but it's got to be drama and it's got to be fiction. So you know, some of this stuff will be useful to me. Some of this stuff I need to change. And the first thing he said to me was, what's the book about? And I said, well, my guy Rebus goes to prison. He's in Edinburgh prison. There's a murder and he has to investigate the murder. He went, he wouldn't come here. He said, there's no way we would have an ex-Edinburgh cop in a jail in Edinburgh because this place is full of people who'd want him dead. And I went, yeah, that's the drama. That's why I'm doing it. And I said, so how could we get him in here? I said, what if, you know, he has to be here. He said, no, he'd go to Dumfries or I said, I don't want him to go to Dumfries or Inverness or Perth. He has to be in Edinburgh. He said, well, maybe he'd come into the special unit. And I went, okay, I can work with that. Okay, and anyway. But it was, so we kept in touch, and I was writing the book, and I'd have a question, I'd email him, and he would email me back. And then I sent the book to my publisher, and they came back with some queries. And one was, you don't describe what the prisoners are wearing very well. You know, could you give us a bit more detail on what they wear? So I got back, and I'd forgotten. I don't remember what they wear. So I went back to him, and he said, oh, it's interesting. He said, On the wing, they wear whatever they like. But if they're leaving the wing to go elsewhere in the prison or out of the prison, they wear colour-coded tops, so we know what kind of prisoner we're dealing with, a remand prisoner, a lifer, whatever. He said, and here are the colours. And there were about 6 or 8 different colours. But what interested me, and I might have to explain this a little bit for an audience down here, down in the south, he said lifers, murderers, serious hardcore prisoners wear green, and sex offenders wear maroon. Now, there are 2 football teams in Edinburgh. Hibernian play in green and Hearts play in maroon. And the prison actually is almost next door to the Hearts football stadium. And I said to him, why, and he said, well, the governor 2 before me decided on the colour scheme, and yes, he was a Hibernian football fan. He said, it's not the same in every prison in Scotland, Ian. He said, if you go to Perth jail, it's exactly the opposite. The sex offenders wear green and the lifers wear, and I said, is that, yeah, he said, the governor there was a Hearts fan. I thought, that detail is so good, it's got to go in the book. It's got to.
But essentially, what you're talking about is, I think, a really interesting subject, which is the difference between truth and fictional truth. That is to say, the truth that a writer, or the way a writer describes something with little details you pick up in your research that gives you the authority. And people say, well, what you've just told us, he must know what he's writing about.
Exactly.
But actually, you're making most of it up, and who's going to know? My favorite example of this is my great hero, Ian Fleming, the author, of course, of the James Bond books, who in From Russia with Love gives an extraordinarily detailed picture of Smerich-Spionim, the evil organization, which is sort of like KGB in Moscow. And he gives an absolutely detailed description of the building and the corridors and the green radiators and the light switches, and he knows everything about it. And there's a famous story of a journalist who went to Moscow and went to the address given by Fleming in From Russia with Love and discovered that the building was actually a flower shop. But he sold it. He sold it with those details.
Yeah.
But do you find, I mean, you write a lot of television as well, and you're writing this stuff for screen. And so obviously you have to play around with the truth, especially like something like Foyle's War, which is historical. And I'm wearing my historian's hat, I can't help myself. And I'm asking you, because you have to bend and twist things.
No, we didn't. When I was writing Fool's War, I remember the very first meeting I had with Jill and with the first cast was to say, look, we're dealing not yet with something that is not yet history. There are still people alive who fought in the war, and we must be respectful to history and to them and not bend the truth. And so we worked with the Imperial War Museum, and every script was read. And as I've already said, I read a great many books for it. But inevitably, if you're making television, you cannot stop mistakes happening. 2 of them, the 2 mistakes I remember that we got most criticized for was actors who put their hands in their pockets when they were talking. So you can't write in the script, do not put your hands in the pockets. In 1940, especially if there was an officer in the room, you would not do that, and you take off your hat, which I'm sorry I haven't done. And then the other thing, of course, is that on one day, a vehicle broke down. And this is my sort of least happy Foyle's War story, because it was a bus. It was a 1940 bus that we had got at enormous expense to drive into shot. And then the bus broke down, we couldn't use it, but the character had to get off the bus, so they got in a Routemaster bus and drove that in. But that was an anachronism, because Routemasters weren't invented until the 1950s. We were pilloried by some newspapers, weren't we, Jill, for years afterwards. And of course, we were going to actually CGI in the computer, when the film was finished, we would then paint it out and put back in the 40s bus. But then we ran out of money. And so people would say this show is inaccurate and the writer is lazy, but actually, we really were trying our hardest. And there weren't many mistakes made like that, but they're often technical mistakes, the way people behave on set, and things that happen at the last minute. Film is such a dicey business. You're always dashing to get the shot made and to get it right. You can't stop just because because your bus has broken down.
Well, I mean, I remember in the early days, I thought fiction had to be fictitious. And so Rebus would work in fictitious police stations. He would go down fictitious streets and walk into fictitious bars. And everybody in Edinburgh said, that's obviously that police station, that's obviously that part of town, that's obviously that bar. I thought, why are you making it difficult on yourself, Ian? So at the end of book 4 or 5, I burnt down the fictitious police station and moved them into a real police station. And then, of course, cops would come up to me and say, we've not got a canteen. You've put a canteen in our police station, it doesn't exist. And the biggest mistake I made was a small one, but crucial. I was living in France during the writing of most of the early Rebus novels. And so I was remembering what the Oxford Bar, this real bar that I'd put him in, was like. And I put a foot rail along the front of the bar that you could rest your foot on while you drank. It didn't exist. And I would get letters from people who had made the pilgrimage to the Oxford Bar and had gone, that's not right. There should be a foot rail here. And they would write to me in France to correct me on this, to the extent that the owner of the bar at that time, Harry Cullen, had a rail inserted. And he sent me the bill for it.
But you know, the people who write in and tell you the mistakes you've made in your books, I make lots of them, are enjoying the book in their own way.
Yeah.
So I never object to the fact that people send it in. And again, another of my great literary heroes, Conan Doyle, made mistake after mistake after mistake in his books. I mean, can I just quickly tell you two of my favorite Doyle mistakes? They're in the same short story, his greatest ever short story, which is what's it called? The one about the snake, the Speckled Band. Thank you very much. I'm a Speckled Band. I'm giving it away, but it's a short story. The killer sends a snake into the room, which kills the person by biting them. Then the killer plays a flute, and the snake climbs a rope and goes through the vent shaft. And snakes are deaf. That's the first thing. They can't hear. And there is no way that a snake could actually climb a rope. It's physically impossible. It doesn't stop it being one of the greatest detective stories in the world. And there's another great mistake, because I was actually talking in a Sherlock Holmes society about this. And this is an example of people's absolute adoration of characters and their refusal to believe that anything is wrong. But it is true that Watson, in some of the books, is wounded in the First War in Afghanistan with a bullet into his shoulder. But in other stories, the bullet is in his leg. And I remember saying, but this is an example of Doyle getting it wrong. And somebody said, no, Anthony, you've just misread it. When he was shot, he was tying his shoelace, and the bullet. So anyway, I don't worry about mistakes. But you've had people trolling you. You've had a lot of trouble with your.
Well, I mean, there's a kind of sliding scale of what a mistake is in what I do. Non-fiction is entirely different, kettle of fish, or can of worms in my case, which is what I ended up opening when I wrote The Five. And there are people really, really wedded to certain tellings of certain crimes, So I don't have that latitude to really embroider. I mean, I am sort of envious of what you can do, and the fact that you can just kind of take your laptop wherever you want. And I mean, I can't just take my laptop wherever I want. I have to bring about 10 books with me, and God knows how many notes, and it takes forever to really think about what I'm saying, because everything is very deliberate, because what I'm trying to do is tell a story that's true, but also within the framework of history as well. So when I wrote The Five, I got an enormous amount of pushback from people who are called ripperologists, for whom Jack the Ripper is the end-all and be-all, and they have prided themselves on knowing everything there is to know about Jack the Ripper. And what I found is, absolutely kind of baffling to me, is this idea that it's almost like a prayer or something, something that they recite. It's like Stations of the Cross, that like when the women died, this person saw them at, 1:05 a.m., and then they moved here, and then this person saw them, and then they were, and then this person heard this, and what I did was I threw all of that out the window, and the fury that I did not tell the death story, that I removed all of that bit because I didn't think it was an important part of the life story of these 5 women, absolutely infuriated people. And they said that I had deliberately omitted things, that I had hidden the truth, it's extraordinary. And I am very envious that you can just make up a crime and you don't have to worry about it. It's all fictitious, because I feel I have a responsibility of truth to the people that I write about, to the descendants who are alive today. Mm-hmm. And some of whom I have met as well.
It was like in Fool's War, where when we were shooting Dunkirk, which we shot in Hastings, the little boats going out, somebody came to the set and said, as a boy, I went in one of those boats, and I went to Dunkirk and back. And it was a very moving moment. I think, touching history.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you say we just make it up. I mean, I tend not to. I tend to, the stories begin with something that's actually happened. And I go, why did that happen? What if it happened in Scotland? What does that say about us as a society or as human beings that this kind of crime is happening? And that gets me going. And I mean, it used to be that I would actually take, so for example, Black and Blue was a real serial killer called Bible John. I made him a character in the book. And then I wrote another book, Dead Souls, which had started life when I read a newspaper report of a paedophile who'd served their sentence and they were released back into the community quietly and sent to this quite rough housing estate in Stirling in Scotland. And they were outed. And this local family, this matriarch and her sons, basically got the community together to drive him out. And then it turned out that she had empowered the local community to the extent that they got rid of her, because it turned out her family were a problem family, and they were responsible for quite a lot of crime on this estate. Anyway, and so there's a character very like her in the book, and I went to Stirling to do an event. She was sitting front row.
No.
Book on her lap. And I thought, shit, you're in trouble here, Ian. Big Mags Haney, she was called. Big Mags. And so at the end, she came up and she said, I know it's me in this book. And I think a journalist had tipped her off. But we had an okay conversation. It was fine in the end. But I thought, Ian, you better start writing fiction, pal. Because when you write about the real world will bite back.
Well, they do. They do. They want, they want their pound of flesh sometimes, and all sorts of people come out of the woodwork, and sometimes that's really, it's really wonderful. As I said, I've met some of the descendants of the Ripper victims, and have a great relationship with them, and it's really quite powerful. But you have to tread very carefully. And again, this is right back to what I was saying about the ethical questions when you deal with it.
So what was it that attracted you to Crippen then?
Well, actually it was Inspector Dew. Do you know about Chief Inspector Walter Dew? Is one of these kind of, well, I mean, he wrote his own memoir. So of course the reason why we remember him is because he wrote, the title of his memoirs were "I Caught Crippen." So he dined out quite a lot on that story. But the interesting thing is what ties him with the whole reason I even know about the Crippen case, because it's funny. I mean, you can do a straw poll in any room and you ask, have you ever heard of the Crippen murder? And half the room will put their hands up and the other half won't. So I hadn't heard of it, but when I was researching the Five, he had worked on the Ripper case as a young officer, and so he wrote his memoirs about that. And there's so much embellishment in these kind of 1930s, 1940s memoirs. They're a genre in themselves, and they're quite interesting. And I just thought, oh, well, what's this Crippen thing? And then I went and I read the subsequent chapters. Like, God, this is an amazing story. It's this transatlantic kind of epic story of the world on the brink of modernity. So, like, the world is changing so fast at the turn of the century. You have, within a handful of years, you've got automobiles on the street. You've got flight. You have, super fast ships. You have Marconi wireless technology. You have motion picture. You have X-rays. All of this is all happening so quickly. And of course, we're heading towards the First World War. And Britain and the United States were such interesting places. And this murder captured the imagination of so many people at this time on both sides of the Atlantic. It was an international manhunt when Crippen and his mistress Ethel, dressed as father and son, went on the run together. It was called the crime of the century.
But the first crime to be solved by telecommunications.
Yes, and interestingly, that is the only thing anybody ever remembers about this story. And yet, look how much more of the story there is to tell.
Well, the thing I remember is that the detective got on a ship that happened. The Crippen ship had already sailed for America. And the police officer jumped on a quicker ship.
Yes, and that
overtook,
yes.
basically overtook, and was waiting quayside.
Yes, and that it was the extraordinary thing, because you have to remember at this.
It's a hell of a car chase, isn't it?
It's a hell of a car chase, but it was also, I think, one of the first kind of real-time crime dramas unfolding because newspapers were published twice a day. And so the whole world knew that Inspector Dew was on the other ship and that Crippen and Ethel were on the Montrose. And they would draw diagrams of the only people who didn't know that the whole world were watching were Crippen and Ethel. And they would draw diagrams of where the Laurentic was and where the Montrose were, you know, and they were like going like that across the Atlantic, you know, sort of like a game of Battleship. And people would buy newspapers twice a day to get these updates. You know, where were they? Where were they? And Inspector Dew, just by kind of a whisker's breath, managed to get into Quebec before the Montrose did, and he boarded the ship. And the entire world's press were waiting, and they were waiting in boats, so that when Inspector Dew came on board, disguised as he was as a pilot, and he walked up to Crippen, who was standing on the deck, and he said, "Hello, Mr. Crippen, do you remember me?" And apparently Crippen's face just completely fell. Of course he remembers him. And the ship blew its whistle, and then the press, and it was described as like they boarded the ship like a group of pirates. They didn't even wait for the gangplank to be lowered. They were climbing up the ropes, and the ship was overwhelmed and frantically wiring their stories back all corners of the globe. It's really quite an astonishing story for that time.
And these days, it'd be just one person going press send.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Or AI.
Yeah, yeah.
Even worse.
Yeah. What about? I mean, can we talk a little bit about process? Because I know that was meant to be part of what we were talking about, was how you actually write. I know you write all the time. I went on holiday with this guy once. Went to stay with him in Crete. And he would come down to breakfast at 10 o'clock, having written for 5 hours.
It was a late breakfast.
Late for you, it wasn't late for me. But I've managed to write a lot of books while being the laziest writer I know. So Anthony writes every day. I write under duress. How about you?
Me? Oh my gosh. I'm terrible in the morning. I hate to admit. So I really don't get going until about lunchtime. And then I find that I'm very focused. So I do everything I have to do before lunch. And then quite often I can write well into the night as well. And I find the quiet time is really great. Increasingly, I find it more and more difficult with our, intrusions from our electronic devices pinging and ringing, and even when I turn them off, and then you can't help but to look at your phone, and there are 15 emails and 7 different WhatsApp messages and various things like that, and that's in your head, and I do find it difficult to switch that off. I mean, I bet you two are much better at it than I am.
The best writing experiences I've had recently have been on cruise ships.
Yes, that's right.
My wife has fallen in love with long cruises. And her favourite was last year when we did San Francisco to Auckland, New Zealand, which was 23 days with only 3 stops. I got so much written.
Yeah.
And the other thing is,
definitely,
because the internet package on Cunard is so expensive, I didn't have any, so I had no mobile phone, no internet, no nothing. And I would, unless I was going to see a show, in the theatre, I would just be sitting there working away.
I've done that as well, and it's very useful. And
the other thing is because I couldn't be bothered schlepping a computer with me, I was doing it all longhand.
Oh.
And that was really that was a really good experience, was falling back in love with taking notes.
I always use a fountain pen to write. It's always been the first draft has been done with a pen, because I find, first of all, it's more like my heroes, the great writers, Dickens and Doyle and Austen, all the writers I love. It connects me. I always think of blue ink being the blood that runs through the veins of all writers over the centuries. I like to be closer to them. I don't want to have Bill Gates between me and my work. I like that as well. Also, of course, there's another side to this, that if you're writing up a book and you're writing quickly and you decide you don't like something, I often tear the page out, ball it, bin it, and then keep going. And then half an hour later, I think, actually, wait a minute. There
Yes.
was one sentence
Yes.
that I like, and I can go back to the bin,
you
pull out
really regret
all the
not
Kit
using
Kat
cut and
wrappers and the
paste.
banana skins. Come out. There's the page, and then I find it. If you press delete, it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Plus, the terror of if your computer malfunctions and you lose a page, or I've lost a chapter once,
Yeah.
and then you're having to write in a horrible way of trying to replicate what was perfect the first time, and you can't do it. So the fountain pen is, to me, is the greatest tool. You said earlier, having to lug your computer everywhere.
I know.
I wanted to say, Hallie, get a pen.
Well, I have transitioned to that. Unfortunately, I'm the slave to cut and paste because, just what you described is, there will be one salvageable gem of a sentence that will be on that crumpled up paper. And it's good to at least have that. I mean, some people have said to me, it's better to get something on a page than nothing on a page. And from something grows something better. The other thing that, obviously, you have much more experience in this than I do, but I, have transitioned from writing longhand to writing on a word processor to writing on a computer using a hard drive disk. But there were times when, and I'm sure you remember this as well, there have been some kind of technological malfunction and something gets wiped, a whole day's work, or God forbid, like a chapter or something like that. And somebody said to me once, another writer, said, actually, you will write it better the second time because you will have internalized it and then you will put it down on paper and be much more fluid. I mean, of course, there's no way of checking because it's gone. You just have your memory.
But it's like laying the foundations of a house and then deciding to move the house and do it somewhere else and building new foundations. Your first draft is a foundation of everything that you're going to build. If it's a TV script, I might write it 10 more times. If it's a book, I'll write it 3 or 4 more times. But to lose the foundations in that first draft is just too horrible an experience. So that's why I've always been, here it is, my paper, and it's always there. And so also I like that. I like the scratch of the nib. I like having ink on my fingers. I like feeling dirty a little bit when I'm writing and not being in that sort of laboratory. When I was doing Midsummer Murders, the TV show, which I wrote the first 6 or 7 episodes of it. I had to stop when there was nobody left in Midsummer to murder. There was all, but I remember saying, don't have forensic. It was something you said a moment ago, Ian, that in the world of just pressing a button on a machine and you get all the answers instantly, Google or a forensic guy coming in a white thing, takes away from the reader because the reader doesn't have access to all those chemical tests and the fingerprint stuff. And that's why I like writing Golden Age crime and try and find a way to go back in time or to write about a world, Midsummer Murders, which was sort of the 1920s in the 21st century, village greens and little old ladies on tricycles, an old-fashioned world. And I thought that in the later episodes after I'd left the show, where they moved into forensics and more into your world, they took away something from the show because, my joy of writing murder mystery is the intellect, the ability for the reader to be shoulder to shoulder. I think it is the only form of literature where you can say this, that from the page 1 to the end of the page, you are shoulder to shoulder with the main character, the detective, searching for exactly the same thing, the truth, and coming to that at the very end together, and then parting company. Have some bod come in a white coat and say, here's the answer. No thanks.
Well, I mean, right back at the beginning of this conversation, Hallie said something about, what was it, about crime reflecting the fears of its contemporary audience. I mean, I think that's true. And the big books that are being written at the moment, the ones that tend to hit the bestseller lists, are dealing with fears that we have about our identity as being stolen. We can't really trust the people we think we know. They're hiding something from us. Technology is out to get us. People are using technology to get us. These are real fears.
Can I make a more existential point, which is why do people even read murder stories? Why do we read detective stories? And we did touch on this a little bit, and I wanted to just give my little theory about it, which is that we live in a world without truth. Truth has disappeared from the world in which we live because, first of all, we have 24-hour news, and the news changes every single day as more revelations come along. So fast you can't keep up with it. The news at lunchtime is going to be stale and gone by dinner, or even untrue. Then you've got post-truth. What is truth? People who now say that is my truth. So there is actually no way anymore in real life that you get real truth, nor do you get retribution. I was thinking about this when I was reading about Baroness Mohn recently in the papers. Everybody in this room will have that same sense of injustice, of no matter what we do, we know at heart we're never going to get any money out of her. She's walked away with 23 million allegedly for her children, all the rest of it, and is still on some yacht somewhere. She's not in the audience, as you know. But nonetheless, there is a sense of almost sort of, it's wrong. Life is not playing fair with us. Detective stories give you what you need. At the end of a detective story, you always get the absolute 100% truth, the I's dotted, the T's crossed, and that sense of satisfaction. It comes with a sense of healing as well. The community is no longer harboring a murderer. We know who everybody is, what they've done. We know who committed the crime, and the detective can then leave. The ultimate outsider goes off like our Byron's Dark Knight into oblivion. But you're left with that sense of satisfaction and truth, and that I think is the core.
But reality
of what
isn't like
we're
that.
doing.
True crime isn't like that, because often we don't know who the perpetrator was. There is no justice for the family of the victim.
Which is why I would never write true crime. I like that. But also it's problematic if you're writing about a police detective, because these days the audience know the police detectives are not necessarily the good guys. Living in a, we've all seen what's happened with the Met Police in London. We've seen them covering up for corrupt officers and rapists and everything else. We've seen what happened with Black Lives Matter in America. So people, for example, Michael Connelly in America, whose detective is very much like mine, and the way his life has progressed is very like the way that Rebus has progressed. We, in our later books, talk about the fact that the police don't necessarily think of themselves as the good guys anymore. They know that their reputation is tarnished. They know they've got a fight on their hands. And we sometimes do have this conversation about whether we're writing, are we just writing propaganda for the forces of law and order? And actually, we need more kind of, corrupt cops in our books.
Nuance.
But then a lot of readers want that sense of justice. They want the detectives to be on the side of the angels.
Can I stop us now and open up questions to the audience?
Got 13 minutes and 24 seconds left.
Okay. The person back there with a hand up.
Oh, hiya. Oh,
Hi.
right. I suppose this one's more for the fiction, for Anthony and Ian. When do you start? Have you got I suppose the process question. So have you done all the research? Do you know exactly where it's going to go? Do you know where your red herrings are going to be? Or is it a case of, I don't know, what is the process?
I'll answer that first, because I'm writing much more sort of, because I know how Ian works, and it's very different to how I work. I start with a very simple thing. Two people, A plus B equals C. A is one person, B is the next person, C is the reason A murders B. And I'm looking for something which is unusual, which is interesting, which is fun, and which has never been done before. That's what all my books begin with. And before I start any research, that's what I start mulling about as I'm walking down. Who's going to kill somebody else? But as soon as I've answered that question to myself, I now have two people. One is, shall we say, a cook, and the other is, I don't know, a writer. Why does the cook kill the writer? So I'm now going to start researching the world of cuisine and probably cookery books, because that's a connection. And I don't need to research the world of writers, but I might nonetheless start thinking about specifics of that character. And what I think I am doing is I've taken the bullseye in a dartboard, the A plus B equals C, and I build around that. The cook is married, there's my next character, but the wife is having an affair, that's another character, and the guy having an affair went to prison for killing that guy over there. And so the dartboard is expanding, and when I get to the double tops, the double 20s and everything, and the whole dartboard is complete, and that's in my notes and in my thinking, then I start to write. Ian.
They say there are two types of writer in the world, the planners and the pantsers. People who plan everything in advance and then start writing, and people who just make it up as they go along. They fly by the seat of their pants. And I'm more in the latter category. When I start a book, I might start with a murder, but I've got no idea who did it or why, or sometimes how. And as my detective arrives and starts to ask these questions, I'm finding stuff out. So I know as little as a detective at the beginning of the story. And if I knew what was going to happen in the story, I wouldn't need to write the story. I write the story to find out what the story is, and it leads me in all kinds of more interesting directions than the direction I thought it was going to go in at the beginning when I started. And I just trust that the muse will descend, that by page 200 I'll have a vague idea of what's going on. I mean, in this book, I wasn't absolutely sure who the killer was until quite late on. There have been books I've written where it's been a second or third draft before I've worked out what's going on. I just trust that the novel knows where it's going, even if I don't.
This is a demonstration of the fact that there are no rules in writing. Every writer has different methods, different ideas, different ways of doing it, and hopefully succeed in different ways.
Yeah, that's why I can't teach creative writing.
Can we have another question? The woman over here. We can get you the mic.
Yep, it's going to take a while. Meantime, tell a joke, Anthony.
Okay.
Hi, thanks. I really loved the 5. So my question is, following on from what Ian was saying about bringing Jekyll and Hyde back to Edinburgh, Rebus could never be in Prison in Dumfries. Like, to what extent is Edinburgh a main character in your books? And also, obviously, I'm excited to see what colour Wraith Rovers features in the kind of prison categories.
Yeah, Wraith Rovers doesn't. My team, they're from Kirkcaldy in 5. They don't feature in any prison. There's nobody from Kirkcaldy ever committed a crime. I mean, Edinburgh is, I guess, the main character. I arrived in Edinburgh to go to university. I didn't really know the city, and I did what I'd always done as a kid, as a teenager. I started writing about Edinburgh to try and make sense of the place. And then I found I could use it as a microcosm for Scotland as a whole, or for the world as a whole. And it's a great city because it is a TARDIS. It's much bigger on the inside than the outside. You can walk around Edinburgh in a day, no problem, but you can spend your whole life trying to make sense of the place. And so it has continued to be, to influence me and many other writers. I'm amazed sometimes at how many writers call Edinburgh home. I mean, we've got J.K. Rowling, of course. We've got Kate Atkinson. We've got Maggie O'Farrell. We've got me and Val McDermid. Irvine Welsh has come back. And some of us are writing about Edinburgh, but we're all writing about different Edinburghs. And Alexander McCall Smith, there's all these different Edinburghs are waiting for us to use. But, it can be frustrating because you go, well, I've got a great idea for a story, but is Edinburgh the right setting for it? So the next book, the book that's going to be published next year, is actually set in London because it's about dark money and oligarchs. And I thought that's really a story that can only be told in London. It can't be told in Edinburgh. We don't have that issue of these huge glass high-rises full of $20, $30, $40 million flats that are never lived in. They're only there to store money for dodgy characters from elsewhere.
That's quite worrying because my next book, Curiously by Coincidence, is also about dark money and oligarchs, but it's set in Torquay.
If you write that book, I will pay you good money. I think you are joking because we know your next book is set in Berlin.
That's the one after.
Okay.
Can we get another question?
Crime is so fabulously human. You talked about AI before, and no conversation goes without AI. When you think about Hawthorne and Rebus in an AI world, do you ever see them partnering, investigating, or do you choose to want to think of AI in a parallel universe?
God.
I'll answer that question first. I think that AI is... I think it's misnomer. I think there's a misnomer there, first of all. My big thing about AI is that AI, the eye should not be intelligent. It's artificial imitation. That's all it is. It imitates humanity. It imitates knowledge. It is sort of a second best. And so as far as I'm concerned, I fear it because I fear that what's going to happen with AI is not how it is already changing how we think, how we behave, how we are fully human. I was talking earlier about research and how, we need to do the journeys and do the work to find things, whereas AI, like my loaf of bread in 1945, the answer is just there straight away. So there's no thinking, no creativity happening. So the short answer to your question is, I won't bring AI into my books. My books are already existing slightly in a sort of golden age of intellectual people thinking. Hawthorne thinks. He does also instantly use hacking. He has a friend who hacks into things to get further information. But there's a twist about that you'll read about in book number 9. And I will avoid it. Ian?
Well, I'm a complete Luddite. I mean, the laptop that I write my books on, I have to put coal in the back of it to get it started in the morning. It's got a DVD-ROM, all right? I mean, it's I watch my DVDs on it. So, and I don't understand any of this stuff. And luckily, because I write about a detective who's no longer a detective, he's now an old age pensioner, I know that he doesn't need to know about it either. Now, readers, of course, are much more savvy than the people who write these books. And they know that if you're writing a book set in the present day, the detectives will be checking your mobile phone, your contacts, your last messages. You can triangulate where a mobile phone is being used. You've got CCTV that you'll be checking, people's Ring cameras. When cops go doorstepping now, they don't say, did you see anything? They say, can I get your Ring camera footage, please? We need to know, but I sort of put all that just off the page. What I say to the reader is, look, this stuff is happening over there, but we're going to focus on the human element, on the kind of old-fashioned human contact that is where the real answers lie. So all the kind of doorstepping and the use of computers and everything else and DNA analysis, that's all happening in another room. Let's just concentrate on these people.
It makes me want to ask you, Hallie, would you write maybe your next book, a modern book, AI?
Wouldn't go near AI.
Your books need to have that historical...
Yeah, I found ChatGPT completely useless for the type of research that I do. Not only that, I'm glad it's useless because I don't think we should be taking shortcuts to thinking. I think we should be using our brains. And I completely agree with you that it is subpar. It's artificial imitation. I think, to be honest, I do not believe that AI should play any part in the humanities whatsoever, because I think it's, this is about human creativity. This is about human beings speaking to human beings, and machines should play no part in that.
I agree. We have the health minister here at some of these sessions. And it just occurs to me, it's so weird that we still allow children as young as 4, 5, 6 years old to have smartphones, which are a portal to God knows what and to so many horrors. And it's been proven all over the world now that mobile phones, the smartphones, are very, very destructive to children at school, are causing massive rises in loneliness, in self-harming.
And bullying.
And bullying and such. And it would be so easy and such a great vote winner, I think, to actually say no smartphones in schools at all, ever. It would have enormous results as well. But sadly, I don't think he's here today.
I think we have time for one more question, quickly.
Smartphones out, books in. That's what we're saying.
Hi, Jack Blackburn from The Times. You have spoken about your relationships with your central characters and they feel like old friends. I'm intrigued about your relationships with your villains and your perpetrators and how you relate to them. And similarly, Hallie, on that point, you've made a tremendous point about relating with the victims and telling their stories. How do you relate to the perpetrators of the crimes you write about?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember, and I do this in Story of a Murder, is that every crime is committed by a human being. And these aren't monsters. And we must try to learn to sit comfortably with the fact that human beings are capable of doing absolutely terrible things, but they are still human beings. And I think that's, it's a very difficult thing for us to really be comfortable with. In this book, I examine Dr. Crippen Ethel, who was complicit in this, in the round. So we see how they became who they were, and we should feel empathy for them, even though they were involved in something terrible.
My answer is very similar to yours. I always feel a modicum of sympathy for the killer at the end of a book, when he's unmasked by the detective. And I'm always interested. In fact, if you watch Marble Hall Murders, which is being televised, and at the moment we're just finishing it, and it'll be on next year, there is actually a scene where the killer from book number 1 turns up in prison to help with the investigation in book number 3. And I thought that was really interesting. But just because he has, or she, has killed somebody doesn't necessarily mean you've written them off. Their story does continue and they suffer. And I always think that murder is... I resent the title cozy crime. I do not write cozy crime because there is nothing about murder that is ever cozy. You can't be stabbed cozily. But the impulse that makes one human being, as you just said, kill another, it could happen to any one of us in this room, that you lash out, punch the play on the stage at the moment in the West End is about that. And so I always have a sympathy for somebody who commits this terrible crime. And when I reveal them, I wonder what's going to happen next.
A long time ago, I made a documentary series for Channel 4 about evil, and I was able to go to death row in Texas, Huntsville, Texas, where death row inmates are kept, to interview a gang guy who had murdered a woman in cold blood, broken into her house and murdered her. And all the time I was talking to him, there was that empathy that you're talking about, that sense that he was let down by so many systems that led him to this route in his life that led him into jail, where he's just waiting to be. He'd been on death row for 10 years, waiting to be executed, just running out of appeals. As soon as I got back to the motel, having interviewed him and sat and read the details of the case, I thought, you monster. I was back to that thing again of kind of thinking, oh, he's atoned for his crimes and everything, he's changed. Then you go back and you think about the family. Now, I've got no time left. But the interesting thing about that was the daughter of his victim had started communicating with him to tell him that she could maybe forgive him in time. And then she'd got in touch with a woman in the UK who had started doing a pen pal thing with killers on death row as well. And so you had this triangulation of the mother of a girl who'd been killed, who was writing to prisoners in the States, the daughter of a woman that had been killed, and both of them communicating with this guy who had killed the mother. And it was that gave me a really interesting human triangulation. That means you can be a monster, but also not a monster at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
You can be Jekyll and Hyde, kind of.
Yeah. And on that note, thank you so much for coming out. We will be doing signings. If any of you want your books signed or anybody wants to buy books, we'll be in the signing tent. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day at Clifton.
Thank you.